You're watching Onward with Onrie. I'm your host, Kompan, and today we're going to be talking about the 3 keys to establishing and maintaining your comic book series. This is something that I think is extremely important for you to think about whenever it is you decide that you want to work in comics. So the first thing you really want to think about is what it is you really want to do in comics. You gotta soul search. You gotta find that project that chooses you, not the project that you throw yourself on. You know, it's got to be something that really comes in from the heart, and it's got to be something you're willing to take to the top. It's got to be something you really want to fight for. I see a lot of creators jumping from one project to another, and eventually they just kind of find themselves stranded, jumping from that one project to the next. They're really great at launching like their first issues and getting them out there. But then with the second and third issues, their series starts to taper off because they're not as invested in it. They're already moving on to like 3 or 4 other projects. And to be honest, that can be kind of important for people today, because in comics you have to constantly be moving forward. You have to constantly, take on enough work so that you can pay the bills. So all of that's understandable. But we're talking about how to build this into something that can be bigger, so think of it this way. If you invest all of yourself into that one project, rather than invest yourself in 5 different projects, rather than hitting a dartboard blindly, it's like you're aiming in with one precise shot with that right project. And to find that project takes a lot of soul searching. It's not easy. It's going to be full of hardships. There's going to be a lot of stuff that's going to feel impossible. And that brings me to my second point. You have to be persistent. And this isn't just the law for getting established. This is the law for maintaining as well. All right? So you have to be extremely persistent. Every fucking day of your life, you're going to be fighting your doubt in order to persevere. And you're going to be facing doubt from every fucking direction of your life. And it's up to you to decide how much of it you can take. How much of it you can take before you get to a point where you decide, you know what, I need to start thinking differently. All right? This happens with me all the time. Back in 2014, I lost my investor. That was a tough thing. And when that happened, I had to decide, was I going to stop working in comics, or was I going to figure a way to fucking survive and keep going? And at that point, I didn't have many other options. I was already invested. I already had a fan base that I had built up. I had already sold out at all these conventions. Now was not the time to give up. Now is the time to fight harder. And I find myself in a position where I constantly need to push myself further in order to grow. And, it's not easy. It's always challenging because you have low periods. Like the hardest thing for me working in comics, and I think a lot of independent creators can agree with me on this, is in between doing conventions, if there's a long period of time where you don't do conventions, because I believe there's basically a convention happening every weekend somewhere in the United States, but not all of them are big money makers. Some of them can bring in like maybe 30 or 40 people for an entire weekend. That's a small convention. You can't really do anything there, but some people find that going to those shows is very profitable for them. Other people don't. So those are the kind of shows you typically see more in the off season. Like New York Comic Con is held in October, and pretty much after that, the convention season kind of tapers off. And the bigger shows that bring in larger crowds don't pick up until early spring, after tax season is done. So now you're wasting, or you basically got this big block of time, which you have to fulfill by keeping yourself busy somehow. You certainly don't want to waste it. That was a slip of words. But what you really want to do is you want to have something to work on. Like for me, during my off season, I typically work on production more. I have more of a focus of, producing East Shen, which I'm doing throughout the year, but when I have that time to really focus on it, I can kind of get more creative, because when I'm constantly traveling, it's harder for me to focus on being creative because I'm so focused on the business side of things. But at the end of the day, you can be as creative as you want, but if there's no money coming in, it gets kind of challenging. So you have to find ways to occupy yourself in order to bring in money. Some people take on second jobs, you know. I, for one, I'm involved in real estate, and I actually started a new business where I'm selling comic books online through eBay, you know, and just doing some, you know, light dealing. I still have a lot to learn about the business, but, you know, and I'm not looking to like open up a retail chain. It's just something to do online so that I can be doing something so that there's money coming in and I can stay in comics. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of people who work in comics, that's the biggest challenge. It's like, once you break in, how do I stay in? How do I keep working in this business? And you have to be creative constantly. That's the beauty of this job. A lot of people say that you can't make a living working in comics. Well, if you allow that to be true, then it's true. But there are many people out there who have had very successful careers in this field. And there's a lot of money in this field. You just gotta, you know, find ways to, you know, look for those opportunities that work for you. And once you're established, stick to your meat and potatoes. And what I mean by this is simple. Last week I was at Free Comic Book Day, and I visited 2 wonderful local comic book shops nearby my house. So I went to North Shore Comics in Northbrook and Pastimes in Niles. These comic book stores have been around since I was a fucking kid. I used to ride my bike to North Shore Comics all the time as a kid. And I remember when my mom used to work by Pastimes, so I would always go over there too. And both stores have been around, you know, I'm 35 years old now, they've been around since I was fucking 10. And they were long before, I was even born, essentially. So, you know, there are still stores out there that are in business. And they stay in business because they stick to their meat and potatoes. They know who their customers are. They know what to stock in their stores. They know who is coming into their store. They're very passionate about what they're doing. They love working in comics. You know, so, you know, Pete Hurst, he's an extremely passionate retailer. You know, like he tells me all the time when I walk into a store that he stocks single issues because that's what sells for him. It isn't just about stocking the other things. It's not about just magic, you know. It's about having comics. He is a comic shop, and he knows that's his meat and potatoes. He sticks to that. And the same thing, you know, can be said about Pastimes. You know, do they do other things? Sure, but you have to be pretty versatile when you're working in comics. You can't just be thinking about, hey, I'm just going to write comics or I'm just going to draw comics. If you're a freelancer, that's great. But even freelancers, you know, they're working on movie scripts, they're working on, novels, they're working on all kinds of stuff. They're keeping themselves busy with other things other than comics. So you have to also be thinking about, you know, spreading out. You know, I'm also working on a lot of stuff right now to promote the Isun Shin coin. I'm getting more involved in the coin world. And, you know, you have to think like an enterprise. Your project is your enterprise, and it will give you experiences that no paid job can give you, or no corporate job can give you, because in a corporate environment, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, you get very different experiences from working in a corporate environment that, you know, can serve you if that's the field you want to work in. But when you're there, you're being essentially told how to do things according to procedure, you know, unless you're someone who is hired to create a new procedure. But even then, you still have guidelines you have to follow. When it's your business, there are no guidelines. You create the goddamn guidelines. No one tells you what to do. You fucking do what you think you need to do. And sometimes you may make the right decision, and sometimes you might just fuck up. And it happens more than you think to everybody. No one is immune to it. I have made more mistakes than I care to think about. You know, I could list them all for you right now. But what matters most is that you learn from those mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to fuck up. It's okay to fall flat on your knees and, you know, just say, I fucked up, and be okay with it. First accept that it's okay to make the mistake, and then get back on your feet and go back in there. All right? All right, guys. Thank you for sticking around for this week's episode. I'll be back next week, and we'll talk about something new and fresh. Until then, onward to victory.